And it says we're live, and are we live? Yes, according to YouTube's backend, we are. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Bonsard of Radio Retrofuture here with another podcast of Radio Retrofuture, and with me is Ian. Hello, sir.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you for being here. And today we're going to be talking about your Kickstarter campaign and RPG. Am I pronouncing it correctly? Écreme?
Écreme, correct, yes.
So yeah,
Um,
and well, but before we get into that, a quick update, folks. As you all know, we are doing our own Kickstarter campaign as well. Journey to Elysium, a steampunk comic. So if you enjoy these types of settings, you'll like our project as well. And with that, let's go back to our guest. So let's start a little bit with who you are and how you got to sit here.
I'm Ian McClung. I am a editor, game designer, community manager, for Open Sesame Games. I have been playing role-playing games for over a decade now, um, and like writing my own content for them for half that time, or really that entire time if you count being a game master as making content. I rarely used pre-published adventures, though I've run a few of the particularly renowned ones, and those are always fun. And it was that experience that brought me kind of into this position. I was kind of tapped to help bring Écreme and other projects to life. Um, because Open Sesame Games US, our focus, we want to make, we're going to make a few original games, but the other part of our founding um, mission was to translate games from France, from French into English, so that people could experience some of the more interesting games from the incredibly rich French RPG scene. And we're very happy to be releasing Cream as kind of our first one
All
for
right.
that.
So there's an interesting statement there. What makes the French RPGs, because America is kind of now discovering, or the United States is now kind of like discovering there is like this whole geek culture in Europe as well. People are discovering bande dessinée, which are French comics. Now I'm Dutch. I grew up with French comics myself. So and also our own comic Journey to Elysium also has a lot of references to bande dessinée, like Tintin and other Storm and other stuff. So this is my first time hearing about um, the role playing games. What makes them so special?
Something I've found, and I don't think this is just France. I think this is kind of a general more the European culture of role-playing game. At least France, Germany, those Western European countries. I know Sweden has their own thing going on as well. Um, but it's more of a focus on story. Games like Vampire the Masquerade and Call of Cthulhu are much more popular, I think, per capita in Europe than here in the United States. And that's before we even get into the wealth of incredibly like setting forward games that you have in Europe. There's a big focus on setting. I find currently that I don't think we get quite as much, at least not in mainstream releases in the United States. There's like if you look at the second, so the examples I guess for settings like France, you have Écreme, the Chantelos, Metal Adventures, all very interesting settings. You have Shadows of Esteren. They've really filled out that entire world. Germany has the Dark Eye, which is yet another incredibly
Yeah,
fleshed out world.
Schwarzenaugen.
Like,
Yeah.
yep. And there's just a general focus, not simply on a game, but also on having a setting that is incredibly fleshed out that people can really enjoy and get immersed in. And then, of course, there's the focus, more of a focus on role play in these cases than necessarily on just fighting things all the time. Though Schwarze Auge and others, like, Dragonbane was a recent release. Those are more in the style of more traditional fantasy role playing games. So, of course, there's going to be a focus on combat there. But they also normally have mechanics for interesting social engagements and similar things. So there's just this fascinating culture of European role-playing games that we don't necessarily get to see here in the United States because our role-playing culture is predominantly just dominated by Dungeons and Dragons and to a lesser extent Paizo and Pathfinder. They're the next biggest competitor to D&D, from what I understand. But
Hmm.
they're still a tenth the size, if even. But they've also actually focused a lot on setting. They've really really gone out of their way to create a world where these epic heroic adventures that they want can happen, which I think is something we haven't really seen in D&D, which is the dominant force, since second edition, I would say.
Hmm.
Because second edition was before my time, but having gone through the historic, like, all of the old
Yeah, the
books.
second
And
edition is Advanced D&D, right?
yes, second edition was Advanced D&D. It was the last edition published by TSR before Wizards of the Coast took over, and it was fascinating because it gave us some really, like, there was a true focus on setting there. They made things like Dragonlance, Dark Sun, Planescape, the Forgotten Realms. Many would say was at its height
Yeah,
during
yeah.
second edition. Um,
Yeah, the Dragonlance was also from that period, I think.
hmm
Yeah. Well, I mean, I myself played. I did not start with D&D. I started with Warhammer. Um,
Yes.
yeah, because well, then okay, Warhammer has always been expensive, but then it was somewhat affordable. Um, but I don't know. I always had a problem with D&D. For some reason, Warhammer always, but it had more emphasis on the setting, as you say. Like
hmm
your character was just one of the people walking around. Your character was quite vulnerable in D&D. Like everyone was this basically superhero, always performing superhuman feat, be it, you're nonstop walking around in armor or jumping around and doing stuff like that. I never really got invested in that myself. I'm not a fantasy nerd anyway, but like you said, like I played Vampire the Masquerade for a while, and it's far easier to get lost in that lore because it's so grounded. And Warhammer also kind of had that, and D&D is like, everything is possible. It's like, okay, you know, I think there's something about that where you're, especially, when people talk about D&D today, it's always about, balance. And like, really, that's
Right.
that's the thing you're talking about when talking about a role playing game. Where I'm like, yeah, and how every party member needs to have like this niche in the party, so it always feels like you now have to play with a full party to have like to be optimized, as it were.
hmm And yeah, and it's just that's a very funny point. More people talk about the game, the mechanics itself than about the lore. Um, which, I mean, I think that's part of Wizards' current approach. They've kind of thrown out most lore other than a thin veneer of the Forgotten Realms for, like, the core books. And then they released things like what was that? The recent Spelljammer set, or the Dragonlance book, where it's at best not exactly what people wanted. I think their best setting guide that they've released so far was actually their Eberron release, but that was years ago now.
Hmm.
Um, and you know, it's not like people are still talking about it necessarily outside of the dedicated Eberron forums, um, which it's a really cool setting. Um, and so that's understandable. But the community as a whole, yeah, I 100% agree. People aren't talking so much about the story, about whatever. It's more just like, oh, this class isn't that strong, that class isn't that strong. And having run a lot of fifth edition D&D, I personally have run into those issues, you know. And then of course there's the issue of I had to basically create my entire own fantasy world out of whole cloth
Yeah,
because
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
But
well, but what I
that
notice is, are you familiar with Shadowrun?
mhm.
And that's also a German setting. Also kind of hilarious when you think about where they got all the ideas from, like beer brands and stuff. But that's a setting I really got lost in the same setting where a lot of great lore videos on YouTube can be found on is BattleTech, which was also
Oh,
that
yeah.
German company. I don't know. Is Fasa a German company? I think they are. I'm not exactly sure.
That's a good question. Is BattleTech German?
Now
Um,
I'm starting to like wonder because if Fasa is was I don't think Fasa exists anymore. It's now Catalyst Game Labs or was taken over by Catalyst Game Labs. I'm not entirely sure, but
um, I'm not getting FASA Corporation. No, they were from Chicago.
okay.
Um,
Yeah, I
although I,
always associate them with Shadowrun, which was created by Germans. So it's interesting how that goes. But yeah, let's talk about Écreme for a moment down in a podcast that is about Écreme.
right?
Um, but yeah, so how did it come to be, and like, what is it? What sets it apart from other role-playing games? I guess what is your elevator pitch?
So Écreme is the brainchild of Matthew Gaborit, with additional adaptation by Alexandre Clavel and Samuel Metzner. Matthew Gaborit is a French author. I think he's fairly well known, and it was one of his. And it's essentially a setting from one of his first, not quite a series. It was a duology. It was just two books, Boheme. Um, and in this world, there was shortly after the Industrial Revolution, there was a massive disaster. There, the exact nature of which is unclear, at least in the game setting. I think in the original books, it's a flower that self-replicates but then rots, and like it was supposed to solve world hunger. It was some kind of crop that grew super easily, and it kind of just exploded, like just in population, and then but then all of it quickly started to rot, which was an unforeseen consequence. So it was kind of an Ice Nine situation, um, and the entire world ended up getting covered in this flower rot. Which, again, this isn't quite the angle we're taking in the role playing game. In the role playing game, it's a little bit of a different origin. We leave it purposefully unclear, but essentially it's acid. It's dangerous acid, and it essentially terraforms the entire Earth, leaving behind just a few islands where humanity has to struggle to survive. Now, naturally, life found a way, and humans built these massive vertical cities that you can see in this key art here that you
Hmm.
that you have up, kind of, that
Yeah,
focuses
spires
on,
essentially.
yeah, just massive buildings, um, and once these cities became established, they started building outwards. They built massive bridges known as the traverses that crisscrossed the world, safely crossing the acid below. And through fate or simply luck, they connected to other cities and soon created this lattice that interconnected the known world as it is. Um, and from there, we kind of get to the narrative present. Um, there are various countries. Pretty much all the countries are based on powerful cities and city states, given simply the nature of the geography. Um, and they just had a massive war, the Acrimony Wars. It would be our equivalent of World War One, technically speaking, but with the consequences and the unwillingness to fight of the Cold War after it. Um, and so currently in the narrative present, you have various nation states and cities playing a subtle power game of spies and political maneuvering in order to gain power over each other. Because in a world where resources are naturally scarce, having a major war breakout is naturally a disaster, and nobody wants to deal with the fallout of that. Um, steam machinery is dominant, simply as a result of the Écreme, while it itself does not evaporate, which is why this is still relatively safe for humans, at least as long as you don't fall into the acid. Um, if you mix it with water, it increases the explosiveness of the water when you boil it. It simply makes the water boil more explosively, which grants much more power than you would with other, simply using other normal like fuel sources. So we've kind of we built in the reasons for having steam machinery into the setting, and so
Well, I mean,
naturally you
that's
have.
kind of an important detail, right?
Mhm.
So,
Exactly. Naturally, you don't have boats. The Écreme is incredibly acidic. It will eat through metal. So even if you have a boat that can last one trip, it probably won't last many. Um, so naturally, transportation is predominantly trains on the traverses and airships in the skies. Um, and then, of course, if you're particularly rich or an inventor, you might have your own steam-powered automobile or motorbike. Um, but the people predominantly use trams, trolleys, trains, and walking to get around.
yeah, gotcha. And what is the role that the players take? Like, are there what are the antagonists?
So, in a given game of a cream, the players are going to come from the player characters are going to come from a variety of backgrounds. Um, They could be anyone from an incredibly wealthy merchant noble to a traveling worker, who is simply looking for their next job and hopefully their next meal. Um, so the player characters can come from a vast number of backgrounds. What's important, of course, is whatever events might bring them together. Normally, these events are, we offer guidance into how to bring the players together. Sometimes they share the same unfortunate circumstances, like they might be trapped in a customs line together, and then they all had their loved ones taken hostage, and so they meet each other because they happen to be the four people who had their loved ones taken hostage. Or they might find themselves each uh, tapped by the Ministry of Propaganda to look into things within their control. And then the Ministry of Propaganda brings them together to work together because each of them have connections, whether they know it or not, to a greater mystery that the ministry is trying to unravel or something. Um, we do make use of ministries and other governmental entities to bring the players together because, again, in the narrative present of the setting where all the countries are playing this subtle power game. Anyone could be a pawn, whether they know it or not. Um, and so we really like to play into that. And it's actually really funny that you mentioned Shadowrun earlier, because that's actually part of our Appendix N for how one can expect the Écreme level gameplay to happen. Écreme is built for long-term campaign play. We've simply broken it up into four like levels or tiers of gameplay, simply
Right.
based on the nature of the mysteries that they're investigating, and the kind of things they are, and the kind of knowledge they already have at their disposal. And so Écreme actually plays a lot like a more investigative style of Shadowrun or Cyberpunk in the early game,
Right.
because you have these massive cities, you have the dystopian governments, you have poverty on one hand and vast wealth on the other, and we really play into those social themes for the
Mm-hmm.
game.
All
Um,
right. So yeah, it sounds like you want like players to actually like explore the cities and the setting in their early gameplay, as it were.
Absolutely. And so, they'll find themselves in a like super in some kind of, mystery or other, and then as they play, more supernatural elements might come to light. There is a supernatural undertone to a cream, predominantly based on human emotion and the idea of the collective subconscious. Because, you know, we're taking this dystopia and looking at how people would feel existing in a dystopia, and how people might try to overcome this overall melancholy that they might feel every day because of living in this imperfect world. And in many ways, does uh, it does actually coincide with our own current world.
Mm-hmm.
You have a lot of the social issues and woes that we see today. We just simply hope that we've given you an interesting setting in which you can explore them
Mm-hmm.
in and have a little bit of fun,
Mm-hmm.
looking at things.
Right.
Um,
Well, I mean, it's definitely a thing that I try in my books as well, without hitting people over the nose with it. But yeah, that I think that's overall a nice thing about steampunk, and why, especially why the alternate history element for me is that important in the genre overall. Um, so let's see. We already talked a little bit about the exploratory nature thereof. Now you worked with the in collaboration with the authors, but this was already a role playing game before. It was originally a French role playing game, right?
yes, yes, and actually, I appreciate again these wonderful images you have, because I know I sent you the one on the right, but the one on the left is actually the original cover from, I think, the 1990. Ooh, when did it come out? 1994,
Oh
1997, I
wow,
want to
that's
say.
okay.
The
So it's
the
already an older game. Gotcha.
yeah, the original version of the game. It's or yeah, I think 1994. It's almost 30 years old at this point. Um, and that version, it's definitely a child of the 90s. They were working with a shoestring budget. Um, and it had more of a you had attributes and other kind of mechanical standards of the day existing within it. But they actually, Editions Matago was the original Kickstarter for the modern Écreme back in 2016. Um, and that's when Alexandra and Samuel kind of overhauled the original game system, and essentially the edition we have now is a second edition or a remaster,
Gotcha.
however you want to look at it.
It's a
Um,
translation of the 2016 version.
yes, and so the English edition is going to simply be is simply a translation of the 2016 version, which got rid of attribute scores entirely, and among other things.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So let's see. What is it? Yeah, I tried to get another game developer in it, so we might have more interesting questions for you because there's only like so much you can ask about the game mechanics without becoming boring for the listener. But what was the focus of how the player attributes work? Like, what is it that you how how to phrase it? Like, what kind of experiences do you want the players to have? We already talked a little bit about exploration, but is it more focused on stealth gameplay or more on combat or social situations? I guess that's my question.
Okay, it is definitely more of a social slash narrative RPG. So while you might have fighting or stealth or what have you, it all serves the overarching narrative. Um, and the resolution mechanics are relatively straightforward and simple, so that they can get out of the way in favor of any narrative play you might want to do. Um, we and there are some various free form aspects of character creation that really let you kind of make a very straightforward character who also gets bonuses for who they are, and for just kind of the person that you've made, and how you want to play them. And so you'll start out with this basic character. You might have some proficiencies, some skills, but everyone has traits, and the traits are going to be just parts of your character that you want to focus on while role playing. And so anytime you could work your traits into a scene, you get a bonus for when you roll to try to achieve what you're doing. And I think that lends itself very well to kind of the more narrative nature of the game, where the players, like I mentioned earlier, are going to be basically doing a lot of investigative gameplay to begin with. But then, as they discover more and more of the paranormal nature of Écreme, they'll find themselves embroiled in cults and other things, similar to like seasoned Call of Cthulhu, um, or like low-level Vampire the Masquerade, where the supernatural elements are apparent to you, but they might not play a massive role quite yet. And so it's this entire journey of the players learning more about the world around them, and as they learn more about the world around them, they get more involved in the stranger aspects of that world. This is around the time when players that are playing, the hardcore capitalist merchants and folks might start realizing, oh, are we the baddies? Um, and from there, they might start trying to change things as characters, and changing their mind, and just simply changing as characters.
Hmm.
The
Okay,
game does
so
lend itself well to character development.
yeah, right. So yeah, I guess this is limited to two questions, which can be answered separately. I think. Like one of this, you talk about the exploration. Like, what does that demand of a game master in regards to what knowledge he needs to have on the setting, and to how did you bring forth the investigative gameplay? How do you promote that in the game system itself?
So that's a great question. So essentially, scenarios in a cream, we give you the world, in the player's guide. It has everything you need to know about the world. Then the conductor's manual has the secrets for the conductor, the game master. Um, and so we essentially do expect you to do a little bit of homework. You don't have to read the entire thing, because naturally not everyone in your world is going to know everything about anything. or everything. So I like to think knowledge gaps in some cases are at least natural.
Yeah.
So we do expect you to read a little bit about the area that the adventure is going to be taking place in, simply so you can get the ambiance and the milieu of the world there. Um, and then we have and then as far as the other question, um, like how do we lend ourselves to the investigative nature of gameplay? That's actually scenario design. The way we've designed the scenarios, there aren't any dead ends. It's more of I don't know if you're familiar with like plot structures or especially like game mastering structures, but the majority of scenarios in a cream are essentially spider web patterns where you might have NPCs around the edges who have specific bits of knowledge, different bits of knowledge, but
Hmm.
each bit of knowledge they might have is pointing towards the center of the web in some way.
That's
And then,
right.
of course, the scenarios are still going to vary in your individual experiences of it, in what leads you end up following as players, based entirely on the kind of characters you're playing, what your priorities are, and who you're talking to.
All right. We've got a question from one of the viewers. Are there mutants in your world?
Yes. Um, yes, we've been purposefully obscure about the more supernatural elements of Écreme, kind of leading up to to the Kickstarter, simply because it is like a secret. Um, but we're 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 more than happy to let that cat out of the bag. Um, yeah, they're absolutely mutants. People can be changed by the Écreme, and the Écreme definitely has monsters that can emerge from it and cause problems all their own. Um, there are also, of course, cephals, which are humans gifted with psychic powers. Um, and they can also range in appearance from, simply looking like anyone to perhaps having been mutated by their own powers or the Écreme that they access as a result. Um, that's an excellent question. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. So a question for me. I'm currently talking with a game developer about making a game based on or setting the Association of Ishtar. Now the game was already made. It's a translation. What was the part that the authors played in this translation?
Um, they actually helped in large part translate the starter kit that we got out there for free. You can find it on Drive Through RPG, or if you follow the Kickstarter link, it's on the Kickstarter page. Um, they helped do the initial translation of that, and then of course we got professional translators for the core books, and also the authors played a large part. Well, and me. We actually went through the glossary of terms for a cream together and determined, what words would be what in English.
Yeah.
Um, because the world does use some of that fun alternate history, almost like sci-fi jargon. Frank
Yeah. Yeah.
Herbert's
Yeah.
Dune. If you're familiar reading the first few chapters of that and being completely lost because they're just throwing words out there that you have zero context for,
Mm.
that's how early reading of a cream can feel sometimes.
Yeah. I know. Especially when you're writing stuff like that, it can really snowball. Like my concept is so simple, but I can do so much with it, and people would come up with slang for certain anomalies in the world. So yeah. Question for the guest: what would you say is the worst job imaginable in this world?
Oh, um, there are a lot of bad jobs. This world is dystopian. You've got this massive difference between the rich and the poor. If you're poor, you're probably going to be living closer to the Écreme, which is this acid sea, of course. If you're rich, you're living much further from it. Um, if you get too drunk one night walking home and accidentally stumble over the edge of a canal, I mean, that's not even a job, but you just died or grossly disfigured yourself from the acid. Um, that being said, really depends. Choose your fear. Are you afraid of heights? Then you're probably not going to be an Icarian, who are people that pilot gliders between airships during wartime. They'll try to board enemy airships and take them over from inside, as well as dueling other people in the skies. You have people that wear these massive, heavy diving suits to dive beneath the Écreme and set up, the bases of the bridges and also try to find salvage and other such things. But one crack, if it, in that suit, if the Écreme eats away a important component, then it's over. You could also be an acrobatic worker, who are people that like to work on the edges of the bridges and traverses, maintaining them. You lose your balance there, or you fall, or your harness breaks or something. You go plummeting into the acid. Um, you have, of course, your Dickensian factory workers. This is an industrial era, similar to our own, American Gilded Age or English Victorian Age. You can go as far as late Victorian, even early Edwardian, I would say, in terms of technology, and be fine. Um, but but yeah, factory work. You're not even close to the Écreme, but you have, 12-year-old orphans getting their arms mangled in the machinery. That's pick your poison. The world's awful.
I suppose yeah, from the guest, I suppose in this new crazy world there are no more asylums.
There are. There are still asylums. Simply because they do make interesting narrative spots, and some governments like to try to take care of their populace more than others. It really depends on where you're at, and of course, not all asylums are created equal. There might be an asylum with incredibly progressive views on how to treat their patients, and they're actually doing an incredible job, and everyone might be comfortable and happy there. But you could also have, yet again, you know delving into that Dickensian influence, just these awful asylums that do nothing good for anyone, um, and are simply a place to put people who you want to simply have disappear.
Yeah, I noticed kind of it's more of an observation in general that when it comes to the steampunk RPGs, either it's fantasy with a steampunk skin, or it's like this. It's all dystopian. I think when it comes to steampunk RPGs, am I making a right observation there?
What would you count Space 1882 as? Or I
Well,
think it's
I heard.
1882, right?
Well, I guess although I have a lot of people calling it Everpunk, but yeah,
That's
I don't know.
fair.
I guess that would be the exception. Um, but I mean, it's almost pulp, really. With Life on Mars and then all those influences.
True.
Um, yeah.
Um, yeah, and I mean, eh, that's kind of the thing, right? It's steampunk, just like there's cyberpunk, and so, like, yeah, it's dystopian simply because that's kind of the nature of these things. Rampant imperialism, um, you know, industrialization, people having their rights stepped on. It's almost necessary for something to be a punk setting to some degree anyway, right?
Let's see. Do I have any other things I can come up with real quick? Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the campaign. What should people be on the lookout for? What can they expect? Do I know?
Um,
Do you know? Here's a question. Do you know 1882?
uh, 1882, like Space 1882, right? I think that's
Is
just a
that Space
response to that.
1880? I'm not sure what
No.
year the space game is from the
Yeah, what
top of
is
my
the
head.
space? What is the year for the space RPG or the
I am
space
not
steampunk?
sure, to be honest with you.
Or is it 1892?
Yeah, I think that was 1892. I'm not sure myself. Now I need to look it up.
No. Space 1889. That's the one.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure. Could you elaborate on what you mean? Now there's also a Western series which is just a year. That is a spin-off of what's that neo Western called Yellowstone. What?
Yellowstone?
Yeah, it's kind of like a modern Western, and it has two spin-offs. Oh yeah, and the viewer meant Space 1889. Um, yeah, was that 1888? Yeah, the series is just a year. Like they've got, I think, 1902 or 1904, and then they've got one that's what's that extremely hard video game called from the 90s about life in the Western something something trail, Oregon Trail.
Oregon
That
Trail.
that is what it is about.
Okay.
So yeah. I was surprised the guest knew that old RPG. Actually, it recently got a new re-release,
Mm-hmm.
so it's still being made. I should invite those guys over on the show sometime as well. But no, it still exists. It still has a fan base. So yeah. Um. So I guess what is your favorite steampunk setting slash RPG, apart from Écreme, of course.
Oh man. Um, that's that's a hard question, honestly. I really love the art for Clockwork Empires, or not Clockwork Empire. Oh, what is it? No, not that one. I have to look at my drive-through. Because I actually did quite a bit of research into other steampunk RPGs while I was coming up with the overall marketing strategy for Écreme, and something interesting that kind of came up was that there aren't many. How do I explain this? There aren't many true steampunk RPGs,
Yeah,
if that
yeah,
makes sense. A
yeah.
lot
No, I know
of
exactly what you mean. Most is fantasy with a steampunk skin.
exactly Space 188. Okay, yes, here we go. Um, I can sort by tag. Thank you, past Ian. So there's Space 1889. That's definitely the big one. Then there was Idara, a steampunk Renaissance RPG. Um, Way smaller. They only had like a $7,000 Kickstarter, um,
Mm-hmm.
but they're also very niche. Then there was Mutant Chronicles, kind of.
No, Mutant Chronicles.
Really,
Oh, yeah. Is that the same? Is that based on the same universe as the film?
I am not familiar with the film. I just know that it was a Modifius game, but it's definitely more like Stormpunk. I don't know how to describe it because it or Diesel Punk. It's almost like Warhammer 40K, but a little more steampunk.
Yeah,
If I had to describe,
yeah.
what it looks like.
If that's the same universe, Oh wait, no, I know these. Yeah, they are like a techno fantasy role playing game. It says
Right.
on the
And so it's
cover.
definitely more fantasy
Yeah.
fantasy. Um, there's the Italian Volcania, um, and there's another small one called Tefra. Um, and they both really like 12-sided dice. There's this interesting theme with smaller steampunk RPGs and 12-sided dice,
Maybe because
which
it's
is
all
fun.
based on GURPS.
Maybe.
I wouldn't be
Um,
surprised if that's it.
yeah, the truly could be. Oh, Clockwork Dominion, that's the one, not Clockwork Empires. Clockwork Dominion was the one I was thinking of. They had really cool art direction, but they used this strange bespoke card-based card-based resolution system in the game, which I, I just couldn't wrap my hands around it because you were juggling, character stats and specific cards, like not actual
Hmm.
playing cards, like
So you're constantly
specifically
looking at
for
reference tables.
yeah, for the game cards. Then the two big steampunk games though are Iron Kingdoms and Blades in the Dark.
Blades in the Dark. Yeah, I was looking with a lot of interest at Blades in the Dark actually, for our own system.
Blades in the Dark is cool. I'm hesitant to call it steampunk simply because it's not
It's more thief
from
inspired.
from what I've played of it, it doesn't focus so much on the setting as much as on simply the story, right?
Mm.
It's very focused on simply making a really good heist story with your characters and
Yeah.
friends,
Okay.
and
Gotcha.
it
Yeah.
just so happens to be set in like a Victorian era city.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
Now I get what you mean. If you look at their webpage, they really also demonstrate it more as as a high concept than as a actual steampunk setting. But it's also very clear that the inspiration is Thief. That they really wanted to kind of um, use the Thief video game series as an inspiration. Um, which definitely, as far as steampunk inspired stuff goes, is probably up there uh, in that regard. Well, question for the guest: do you remember when you were introduced to steampunk? We already kind of touched upon that, but was there a pivotal moment?
um, I've always had an eclectic taste in music, and one day while I was in college, YouTube decided, hey, you'd be really into Mr. B the Gentleman Rhymer and similar acts like Steam Powered Giraffe and all that. So, like, my introduction to steampunk in earnest, I guess, was actually through the musical side of the scene.
Okay, interesting. For those who are interested, by the way, in the steampunk musical scene, I actually made a radio station for Fallout 4 with artists like Mr. B, Gentleman Rhymer, in collaboration with them, with their permission, and a lot of other steampunk bands. Many of them don't exist anymore because I did that project a couple of years ago. But yeah, that's a radio show which you can also listen to in Fallout 4 if you download the mod Old World Radio 2. Um, and yeah, that was kind of like my venture into making narrative podcasts, which I should get back
Nice.
to. But yeah. Well, I did some on the Association of Ishtar as well, if you're interested in that type of thing. But yeah, I want more art. That's one of my one of my problems. All right. I've got a feeling I wanted to ask a question, but I forgot what it was. Um, So, as we're approaching the hour, are there some topics you want to talk about we have not touched upon yet?
Oh man. None in particular. Uh, our viewer here asked some great questions, and you've been asking some incredible questions. Um, so I guess I'll give you an opportunity. What exactly is the Association of Ishtar?
Okay, what is the Association of Ishtar? Well, the concept is that it's an alternate 1870s at the moment, and all over the world, rifts are opening up to alternate worlds, like, for example, the world of Écreme. And the Association of Ishtar investigates these anomalies and worlds, and they record their findings in files, which I don't have handy right now, but I publish as short stories. So it's kind of like a steampunk SCP Foundation in a way. Um, and if you're familiar with that, at least. Uh,
I am. I love the SCP
yeah,
Foundation. That's a
then
really
you'll
fun
probably
collaborative writing
enjoy
project.
the Association of Ishtar. And yeah, we've got two novels now, two of the anthologies that have the files that also look like files. We've got a comic series coming up on Kickstarter. And yeah, I hope to have two new book releases by the end of the year. Enwin, which is about a doll that has come to life. Um, well done. It's adorably. I need a word that means both cute and creepy. I'm not sure if there's a word for that, but um,
I mean, Doll that has come to life does most of that heavy lifting.
yeah, yeah. And the art by our illustrator is incredibly adorable. It's a kind of like a steampunk slice of life thing with one of the main characters who always carried a doll with her, and that doll is now uh, under some strange reason has been animated. So it's also all of the books are mysteries. So it doesn't really state what is happened or what the goal of the doll itself is. But yeah, I already started experimenting with the second book with a reference to the A Team. Um, for the people that still know, because I came to the conclusion that a lot of younger viewers do not know what the A Team is. Which, please tell me you know what the A Team is.
I know of the A Team
Yeah.
with Mr. T and
Yeah.
others.
Yes. Jonathan Beck. God, the guy who also played a lot in Star Trek. Always plays a kind of like an outcast character. Famous actor. But he made his start in 18, and yeah, I just love the dynamic of that group. And also as a kick-ass play theme. If you are if you are in a state of I don't want to do anything, go put up the theme of the A Team, and you'll be drilling holes in the wall in no time. Even if you don't need them, trust me, trust me. I mean, they should have that theme with the goddamn instead of the Game of Thrones theme song. You should have the A Team one. Trust me, you will have a far better intro. Um, just make everything the A Team theme. Now I kind of think about it. Anyway, yeah. Now there's one last question. I guess it's a bit of a strange question to end on, but it just came to mind. What was it that drew you to Écreme of all the French role-playing games that are out there?
Um, Honestly, it was the one given to me to work on. I guess it because I was chosen for my skills in editing and game design and marketing and just kind of being able to do several things, wear many hats, that kind of deal. And it just happened that Icream was the first project that we were going to bring to life. Um, and so we just kind of ran into each other for lack of a better way to put it. And it I do believe it is something special. I read through it and I looked at the setting and everything and I really do think it's something special.
All right. Well, something that I wanted to ask as an offer, like, what was something when you were working with the offers? Of course, you're not working on the game system or the lore itself in the stage it was in. Um, but what would be your advice to authors working with game developers?
Oh, that's wow. That really depends on what your relationship is and why you're doing it. I find that a lot of authors are capable of doing game design themselves, and a lot of game designers, especially in tabletop games, are capable of doing writing. And really, it's, if you're doing a team, it would just be finding, who's good at who's better at each part, and just maintaining communication. Um, there's also there's also in game development, when you're looking at like writing and games, there's this concept of ludonarrative, which is simply the idea of how your game mechanics mimic the world and the changes in the story themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so so like, an idea of ludonarrative would be to say, say you get yourself into a combat, and your character takes a hit. A more narrative way to approach things would be to say, okay, your character is now injured. What does that mean for them, and how does that translate into gameplay? Um, if you don't care so much about those things, then you're probably just going to use hit points, and you're just going to kind of, the narrative will be its own separate thing, and the game will also be its own separate thing, and you can do that. But I think when your game mimics your setting and the writing that is expected of it, um, and they work in tandem to create a experience that's better than the parts of the whole. I think that's where the true strength
Mm-hmm.
of working as an author and working as a game designer and working together really is. It's finding, how can we make this system represent the world and experience we want people to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
So it's basically
similarly, yeah,
immersive gameplay, basically.
yeah.
Well, for the viewers, I can maybe give two examples. One of them is like discussions on what was it? Ludative dissonance, where
Yeah,
the game
ludonarrative dissonance. That's a big one.
ludonarrative dissonance. That's the word. Yeah, where when you have Bioshock Infinite, you can walk around in the city before hell breaks loose, and people complain that you can eat out of the trash cans because bit strange, bit kind of like strange behavior, like and like, well, really, is that something you're complaining about? But that was what people complained about. Um, Now, what I've done, like when I started writing my own stuff, I kind of did it also with a role playing game in mind, even though I thought it was gonna be like in the distant future, some point. Um, but like I'm writing these files, and I start with a 150 word pitch. Kind of like, okay, this is the idea that I want to implement at some point. Um, and one of the things that I came up with, you've got like in games, you have like waypoints, right? That tells you where
Right.
you need to go. And some games like try to make it like immersive, like it's an actual thing in the world doing that. So I came up with my own thing, which are kind of like a rift based version of ferries, and these are ferries migrating from one rift to another all the time. What travelers in this world do to find rifts is they try and capture one of these ferries, and either they keep it on a leash, kind of like a homing pigeon, or they have it just in a glass jar and just let it go free and then follow it. Um, so that would be an example of what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, and that's especially for like, video games, right? When you get into the world of tabletop RPGs, you know, it's less about okay, how do we make the waypoint fit into the narrative, and more of how do the characters figure out where they need to go? Because it's a lot more open as far as like the methods you can use for finding out where you need to go, as opposed to in a video game where it's like, okay, we're going to point the player there to save them some time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Some remarks from the chat. No, the movie was loosely based on the RPG. Okay, I did not know that. And it would explain a lot. He's talking about Mutant Chronicles.
Okay.
Interesting film, a lot of interesting. Also has a very indie feel. Yeah, and Ron Perlman, secretly a big hero in retrofuturism. But yeah, there's definitely very interesting aesthetics in that game series. Uh, Far Cry 3 is a great example of Ludo narrative done right. Have I played Far Cry 3? I don't think I've played that. Um, so I cannot judge about that. It's the most realistic depiction of a first person shooter protagonist. Yeah, I cannot say anything about that. Like, when I think about an experience like that, I'm thinking of a game I play regularly, Hunt Showdown. But that's more a first-person awareness game than an actual shooter. Like, it has shooting, but it's kind of like Thief, but played against other players,
Hmm.
and you shoot each other with Winchester rifles. But yeah. So yes. I have no more questions. Can you like pitch the Kickstarter real quick? Why should people support it?
Um, well, we are going to be delivering books. They're going to be gold stamped, etc. Truly beautiful collector's pieces, just from a what you're getting physically standpoint. But also, Écreme is a truly unique setting. With even if you don't care much for the game itself, there's a lot to take from it. You can definitely learn a lot and draw a lot from it for your own adventures. And there's a lot more that's going to be coming down the line as far as stretch goals, such as big thing we're doing for the stretch goals is we're actually taking some French expansion content. So this was in a separate book that you had to buy separately, and we are bringing them in line with the core books. So they're just going to be part of the core books. This expanded content is just going to be part of the English core books. But of course, we have to hit the stretch goals for that because translations aren't free. But we are really excited to be delivering this because we really think Cream's worth it. There's just a lot going on. It's a really cool, steamy setting, and again, if you don't care for the game itself, like the mechanics, it's still an entire setting in a book. And honestly, I really like the game for at least for my style of play. It's just the right balance of crunch to determine whether or not you succeed while not actually being very rules heavy. I mean, you can learn the bulk of what you need for any given scenario in 3 pages of rules.
Okay, awesome. And those starter rules are also linked on your Kickstarter page.
Yes, the kickstart the quick start rules, the starter kit is linked the start on the page. You can find it. You can also find it on Drive Through RPG if you just look up Écreme. Um, and it has everything you need to play. It has a very fast, very short summary of the world, as well as a 3-page overview of the mechanics that you need in order to play, and it also includes pre-made characters and an entire scenario. Um,
Okay, awesome. Let's see. Some from the chat. Do not read the Hunt Showdown bios. Yes, very true. Do not. He repeats. I assume he means your Kickstarter page. We love the Kickstarter page. So,
Yeah, thank you.
I linked the things down below. The link should also be already down below the video for the people who want to watch it. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I think I'm gonna bid you adieu. I think. Do you have some words of wisdom for the audience? That is what we usually end our shows on. So, let's continue that tradition.
Um, n- never, never stop being afraid uh to try new things. I guess like always be ready to just try something new, read something new, even if you think it might not be for you to begin with. I promise you, some things will end up being for you if you just give them a chance. So I guess always just keep an open mind. Always just be prepared to encounter views and things that you never even would have thought of yourself. And yeah, just experience life to its fullest, which I know is kind of generic, but
Uh,
it's what got me here.
it
So
works. It works. With that, something else. We're also gonna try and get the authors of Écreme on the show at some point. Hopefully next week. We need to talk about that. Um,
yeah, we can figure that out. They might be busy for another week or two. We'll see.
okay,
Um,
yeah,
so, but
so
yes, he's
no,
very
no,
interested.
yeah, no, that's coming. So, and with that, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget to check out both Kickstarters. Links in the description. And I hope to see you next week. And with that being said, as always, make things your way.